The purpose of today's webinar is to provide some training on techniques and building your capacity in your board for their performance and effectiveness, and increasing their effectiveness in the program delivery and staff board communications. Also going to speak a little bit about board member and staff strategic thinking, planning, and evaluation. An important part of what we want to get across today is board member recruitment and retention and succession planning. What about that next board that you're going to be working with? And then finally, building successful partnerships, knowing when you've got a successful partnership, how to get them, how to retain them. So that's our purpose. A lot of information is going to be shared today. I just invite you to have a piece of paper and something to write with on that paper, some of the ideas that you're going to be using, in your organization as you continue the work. By way of self-introductions, let's just go ahead and have you type in the chat area your name and organization. Would be great if you joined us today. And just go ahead and do that now. Type in your name and the name of your organization. Your presenter today will be myself, Ray Ledgerwood, Board Works by Ledgerwood, and we'll be using the experiences I've had over the last 40 years or so and working with conservation boards, associations, other organizations, other groups, watershed councils and watershed groups. And they're just really excited about providing this information, some real practical information for you to use in working with your board and the board with your staff. Thanks all of you for putting in your name and your organization. Keep those coming in. We can see them coming in, and we appreciate you logging that. It's my honor to introduce Dan Siebert and Lisa Nafo. And Lisa may be tied up in a budget meeting, but Dan, do you want to get us started with a few welcome and opening comments, please?
Sure, Ray. I want to thank everybody for taking time to join us today. I know for some of you it's lunchtime, some of you it's after lunch, and a few of you have not yet entered the lunch hour. So really do appreciate you connecting with us and hanging out for a while to talk about boards. I want to tell you just briefly a little bit about the National Watershed Coalition. As Ray mentioned, currently Lisa Knopf Owen serves as our chair, and I'm the executive director. The NWC is a nonprofit. It's made up of national, regional, state, and local organizations, both associations and individuals. And the common thread is that we advocate dealing with natural resource problems and issues using the watershed as the planning unit and the implementation unit. There is the current slate of officers. I am surrounded by highly talented and extremely competent women. I'm really kind of proud that our current officer corps is made up of women. We're governed by a steering committee that's composed of individuals and representatives from various organizations and associations. One of my officers is with us today, Barb Oltgen, who is our longtime Secretary Treasurer for NWC. So hi, Barb, good to have you. What we do, primarily we assist watershed project sponsors, be they conservation districts, water improvement districts, county government, and we also provide some assistance to the Natural Resources Conservation Service. You can see the list there, the types of things we do, conducting workshops, training sessions. You can add webinars to that list as we're in the middle of one now. Also provide some assistance in developing strategies and sources for project funding. Spent quite a bit of time with some folks just yesterday talking about funding and working on methodologies to secure funding. We have some resources on our website, most all of which are downloadable for use by you with either colleagues or with your governing body. And that is also where we announce workshops, conferences, webinars, and events. There are a number of fact sheets and feature articles on there, a video or two, and there are some topical fact sheets on there that we find are of interest and concern to most watershed sponsors. There's probably information on there that would transfer nicely to other conservation related projects that you may have responsibility for. Last but not least, the plug for our upcoming meeting. We'll be meeting with the National Association of State Conservation Agencies in Spokane in October. Excuse me. We would love to have you with us there. So mark your calendar. More information about that meeting is forthcoming. It can be found or will be found on our website, as well as a conservation conference website that will be up shortly.
Dan, I also know that you'll be posting the recording of today's session. You get most out of any webinar in your active participation, but the session will be recorded. We've had a few questions about that, and it'll be probably a couple of weeks before you get that up on the website.
Yeah, and I apologize for the phone that's ringing in the background. I thought I had that cut off. I wanted to speak just a minute, Ray, about why we're having this webinar today. We've furnished a number of webinars that were more technical oriented and nuts and bolts oriented about the things we do with watershed structures and watershed projects. But what we find is that really behind every project, every local sponsor, there's some governing body, there's a board. And we find that successful projects and successful sponsors have one thing in common, and that is active, engaged boards, boards that are innovative, boards that are efficient and effective. And so while we can do a lot of technical things and talk a lot about irrigation, upstream flood control, and all manner of things that the watershed program covers, something that's key to being successful is an efficient and effective board that can make decisions, govern, manage money, all those things. And so it's our hope that by presenting this webinar today, that you'll be able to pick up some things from Ray that will help you guide your board, or if you're a board member, will help you guide your fellow board members to a more productive path ahead. So with that, Ray, I think we're ready to roll.
Thanks so much, Dan. And you certainly have picked a topic that's near and dear to my heart, and working with boards, working with staff working with boards is so important. We've got a lot of ground to cover today, and really looking forward to providing that information to you. Let's talk a little bit about logistics, and we'll get right to the meat of the matter. Our webinar ID is posted there. You've already noted that the lines will be muted except for the presenters as we go along today. However, if someone wants to say something to the group, and that'll be raise your hand, and we'll try to get to what it is that you wanted to say or give an example. I may call on you to give an example or two of some of these things that we're going to be talking about today. But primarily, we'll use the chat feature on your computer for questions that you may have. And you've already demonstrated that that's working well for you. You've been posting your names and your organizations up on the chat today. We're going to get to as many questions as we can within that 2-hour period that we have together. But certainly, you know, Dan and I are available via the email or, you know, later afterwards, that sort of thing, if you have a follow-up question, or especially if you've got some evaluation for us. The feedback will really be welcome. Kudos, comments, etc. And you can send those to, and I'll be sending you emails. You can send those to my email address listed there on the screen. So our agenda for today, and I did go ahead and send the session design out to you too, so that you had a little bit of more information about what we'll be covering during different parts of the session today. However, if you'll leave me a little bit of, you know, ability to just go ahead and flex that agenda, we probably won't hit times just exactly on time. We may spend a little bit more time on something that you want to spend some time on and have more questions on. But our opening comments, self-introductions, objective, and agenda will be what we finish here in just a bit. And we'll move right to effective organizations. From there, we'll speak to the building district strategic direction for your watershed program. And then building the leadership and effectiveness with your board, whether it be an association board or whether it be a watershed council or coalition, all of those organizations, and we could speak to each one of those, but building leadership and effectiveness within that board, building a strong staff and board connection, and then knowing good partners, being a good partner and knowing when you've got good partners, and then some questions and discussion, some closing comments, and adjourn. So again, let me just encourage you, grab something to write with or have another computer handy to be able to type some things down. Because one of the questions I'm going to ask you is, what will you be using of some of the things that we talked about today? These are incredibly practical techniques that have been used and used effectively in the work of organizations that we've done in the past. So get out that paper, something to write with, and get ready. Well, let's speak first about effective organizations. Really, effective organizations have four elements that are very, very important. And some of you that have been in working sessions with me before have heard this conversation and this study that came from Washington State University Cooperative Extension. One of the things that you want in your really effective organization is the goals to be clearly defined, and making sure that that our mission, vision, goals, and overall direction of the organization are well defined and known by all board members and staff. Part of that early orientation is to make sure that everybody knows who we are, what we are, where we came from, and what we're going to do, and what we want to do. The second most important element of an effective organization is also to recognize that there are things going on around you. The study talked about this being the working environment, or the things that are going on around your organization that affect your organization. And what you want to be able to do with that is study that and look at that as a board. I actually encourage board members to actually put some time, and staff to put some time on your regular board meetings to discuss what's been going on around us that's going to help us as an organization achieve our watershed goals, right? Or our organization's goals, and what's not really helping us, and what we need to do about it. So analyzing the working environment, very important part of an effective organization. Third element in an effective organization is procedures. Interestingly enough, that a really effective organization, once they know what they want to do and the goals they have, their mission and where they came from, where they're going, and they watch what's going on around them, changes in perhaps elected officials, policies, programs, funding sources, things like that, then having the procedures very clear. Who speaks for the organization? How do they speak for the organization? What kind of communications do we put out? When do we meet? How we meet? The record of minutes and things like that of the meetings, and that procedural pieces are very important too. And certainly, some of the largest ones for watershed organizations have to be that engineering, the liability protections, things like that, and getting good help, on our procedures and policies. The fourth element of effective organizations, turns out, is tension. And it's not that tension is all bad all the time. You probably curled up your nose and said, "Oh my gosh, tensions. Why is he speaking about that as part of an effective organization?" Well, folks, the fact of the matter is that really effective organizations will take the tension that occurred. Maybe they had some stress in the system, a complaint from a customer, a complaint from a landowner, a catastrophic event might even cause tension in a watershed organization. And they look at that in the context of first solving what it needs to be solved and taking care of people and property, but also going back to that and saying, how could we be better as an organization? So that most effective organizations look at tension as a way to improve their organization. If we would have done this differently, if we would have done that differently, if we would have informed the patron a different way, things like that, if we would have done this or that. So we're always learning. Really effective organizations, effective boards working with staff are always dealing with that. So goals, working environment, procedures, tension as part of an effective organization. Now, for those of you that maybe took those worksheets really seriously and looked at those, you'll find that I gave you a worksheet on this that you can actually work from. And what's kind of interesting is if you wanted to list maybe the top two things in each of those elements that your watershed coalition or your watershed organization or your watershed board or your other organizational board should concentrate on to become a more effective organization, I'd like for you to do that right now. So go ahead and write down a couple of things, given that those are the four elements, a couple of things under each of those that maybe would help you be a better organization. really help you become a better organization? Would it be goals more clearly identified? Would it be tensions looked at in a different way? Would it be, a piece of policy or procedure that we really need to tighten up or work on? Go ahead and jot those down on a piece of paper right now. Now, that becomes a really good exercise, folks. And I'm going to send these and get these slides to Dan so that he can make them available on our National Watershed Coalition website. And with that, you can actually give that program to your organization. If this one slide and just had them talk, your board talk about with each other about what it is that they should be concentrating on. Now, the trick to this, folks, is that with your boards, that you don't just want to do great staff work to the point where you hand your board the answers to these things. You want the board actively involved. You're going to hear me talking about that a few times today, but your board needs to be actively involved in the governance of the organization. This is one piece that they could be actively involved. Put that sheet in front of them, that worksheet. Ask them to individually write down a couple of ideas about how we can improve on goals, working environment, tension, and procedures, and then harvest those and discuss those as a board and staff. It's a really great exercise. I think you'll really enjoy doing that, and you're going to learn a ton. If you're a staff person working with a board, you're going to learn a ton about what those board members thought. If you're a board member working with your executive, for once, you finally probably had the opportunity to really talk about this in a governing role. So board members, please use this. Executives, please use that. I put this slide up primarily because I just want to remind us that strategic has kind of gotten kind of a weird connotation over the years. We talk about strategic planning. People curl their nose, said, "Oh my gosh, I want to spend that 2 or 3 days to do that right." But really, in an organization, it's really about the strategic thinking that goes on as an organization. Some of which I just presented you, just a really quick, easy way to get your board really talking about and board members to really talking about what needs to happen for their organization. But then it's the actual writing some things down, the goals you're writing down, the action items that you want to do, the strategies that we want to pursue, the funding sources we want to go about, all the way into the business planning portion of the revenue that will come in and the expenses that we have going out, the next employee that we need to hire, all that thinking that goes into a plan and the development of the plan actually leads to the most important element of strategic work, and that's the doing. So strategic thinking, planning, the doing itself, right? You take that plan and work it. My best strategic plans that I've done with organizations are written on, they've got highlight pen on them, they're crumpled up, they've got red marks on them, check marks next to them, they've got crossed out things. They really have been working it as an organization. That's when you know that the strategic thinking turning into the plan is getting something done. And then a forgotten part of the strategic process is the evaluation. Are we sitting down and talking about it with our board, about how did that work? We thought that we wanted to build this particular watershed project here. How's that working? Is it going well? Have we got the funding for it? We've got taken care of the engineering. Have we taken care of all the things that we need to take care of? Or is it kind of having some problems? And if so, what do we need to do about it? So the evaluating can turn into something like what's going well and log that, make sure you got that. What's not going so well? And what do we need to do about what's not going so well? So strategic thinking, planning, doing, and evaluating, actually a four-part process. And then you've already guessed that when you do that evaluation, you're right back up here to thinking again about what it is we need to do strategically and developing plans about that, strategically doing things and making note of that at every one of our board meetings that we have. You're pulling up at least the strategic priorities of the organization, looking at those and talking about that as a board and staff about how we're doing. Okay, so let's talk about building strategic direction for your watershed program, your watershed coalition, your watershed council, the organization that you're working with, all of those things. Folks, one of the things that I've been asked over the years is what's the most important piece of that strategic thinking and planning process? And I must say that it is really revolves around this exercise that I want you to consider, which is identifying future accomplishments through statements of intent. More about that in a bit. And I want to talk with you about some simple and really practical ways of prioritizing watershed program needs. And then I want to speak with you a bit about the power of three to focus your energy, motivation, and really measure success. And then I'm going to introduce you to something that most people have not seen before, unless you've been in a workshop that I've done recently. And that's a tool called the goals grid. And I think once you find that goals grid and practice it a little bit, then you're really going to find that you enjoy it. So let's get started with first the identifying future accomplishments. I got a lot of questions by folks that said, well, Ray, if we just had a half hour or an hour with our board to do some strategic thinking, right? What would you do? And this would be the exercise that I'd recommend. So if you haven't guessed it, you're going to get a series of really practical exercises and activities during this webinar today. So write a ton of notes. There will be a recording, and also we'll get these slides to you. But I want to internalize this by actually having you do a couple of exercises. So this one's a good one. Pick an organization that you're working with and draft this statement of intent for that organization. By what date that organization, will accomplish what for our watershed program? So those of you that are absolutely in our audience today is mostly watershed program related folks. So we want you to write that. Go ahead and write one down right now and at your paper, at your place. By this date, it could be anywhere between now and maybe 5 years or 10 years from now, we will accomplish this, whatever that is for our watershed program. Go ahead and write those down right now. In fact, just for the fun of it, Dan, I think we're going to have them jot those down in the chat box and see a few examples of these future accomplishments they're going to have in their organization. We understand they'll all be different. Each of you comes from a different organization, but just go ahead and scribe by what date will you accomplish what for your watershed program. Go ahead and type those in. I'll tap the brakes here just a little bit. Make sure that you type in a few of those. By this date, we're going to accomplish this, and send that to us via the chat. We want to see some of those. And as you're doing that, one of the things that you'll want to do with your board is make sure that you harvest the accomplishments one at a time. And what's important about this, folks, is that you individually have everybody write down that statement of intent. And that's really important. So give them a time frame. By by 5 years from now, we're going to have this. By 1 year, we're going to have that. By 2 years, we're going to have this and that and the other. And just have each of your board members and your staff write down one or two of those accomplishments. Harvest those, talk about that as an organization, display them on a large computer screen or display or on easel paper if you're doing this in person. If you're doing it in the way that we're doing it, the chat is one way to do it. We can also use other tools that are available now, polling tools and things like that. These are great, a couple of great examples. Keep those coming in. By what date will you do what for your watershed program? Go ahead and type those in. I encourage you to type those into the chat box now so we can all see them. Don's saying that by 2023, we're going to have a strike team in place. And Don, that's really interesting. I kind of want to know a little bit more about that strike team concept. And I wonder if we can just have you come on and tell us about that. So Don, go ahead and talk with us about that strike team concept. See if I got you on there. So Don, I got you, I hope, unmuted and with us. Are you with us? Hey, Don. That may not work as fun as I'd hope. Don, you unmuted? Well, we'll talk a bit more about these, but Dawn, thanks. And oh, no microphone. Sorry, I called. Wouldn't you know it, right? I'd call on Dawn when she didn't have a microphone to use it. Thanks for putting that in, though. But the strike team concept, we'll come back to it in a bit. Andrea, you said that we will design a level 3 of our Watershed Leadership Academy for North Dakota. Excellent, excellent. And not seeing responses in the chat box. And what we want to be able to do is if you're sending those responses in, send them to all panelists and all attendees. And Gina, thanks for yours. By June 30, 2022, we will have a better staffing policies in place for our conservation districts in our state. Excellent piece of work. And then by July 1st, 2023, we will have developed and implemented a strong urban conservation program for our conservation district. By January 1st, 2022, we will have a list of all the landowners with our contact information on the property in the project area. And Carla noted that she really loves that idea from Dan. Keep on sending it to all participants. If you'll send in the chat, all participants and all panelists, it'll be good. From Jennifer, we got by January of 2023, we will have a streamlined office that works cooperatively with our board members. Okay, so thank you folks for participating in some of those accomplishment statements. Now, if you'll imagine with me the power of your board, each writing 2 or 3 of these statements of intent or future accomplishment statements on their, in writing at their place, at that in-person meeting, and then sharing those one at a time. Just go around the room, have each one not share all 2 or 3 that they wrote down, but share one. Have somebody to type those down on the computer or write those on the easel paper and then post those so that you can start to see the power of your board actually working together in the context of envisioning the program that they feel like that we need. These are excellent examples. Again, when you're chatting, go ahead and send to all panelists and all participants and all attendees, I believe is what it says. And then that way we can all gain from that. But we'll make sure that we send these back to you also. So harvest those accomplishments, one from each the participants. Keep going around the room until you've got them all. And folks, what I want to present to you is this is an easy way for staff and board members to be able to have those quiet voices louder and the louder voices a little bit quieter. This particular exercise really does that, but it also gives the organization a lot of breadth of thought, experience, knowledge, and vision from what these folks want to accomplish. So if I had the one thing I can offer to you here, be writing down the things that you're going to go ahead and use from our webinar today. Okay, so here's an interesting way to look at prioritizing watershed program needs. It's a really practical way to develop a priority list. Now, I know many of you use sticky dots and sticky dots and notes and post-it notes, and we've done a lot of prioritization systems over the years. Let's not take anything away from any of those. But I found in my experience that this particular exercise in prioritizing watershed program needs even is more robust. And here it goes. Have individuals write down the response to this question. If we only had enough time, money, and energy to address one need in that watershed area or watershed program, what would we work on? Okay, so go ahead and practice that. Go ahead and write that down for your watershed program or your organization, could be even your agency or a conservation district. Write down, if we only had enough time, money, and energy to address one need in our organization, what would it be? A little bit different than those statements of intent that we just wrote, but this one is a need that we have. So go ahead and write those down on your paper. And those of you that want to share, go ahead and share with the entire group, all panelists and all attendees would be great. If you had one thing that you need for the organization you work with, and you only had enough time, money, and energy, a limited amount of time, money, and energy to address that need, what would you be working on first? Go ahead and jot that down. Then the really cool part of this exercise, if you're facilitating it, is that you would ask the group then, that one need, we got enough time, money, and energy to work on that one need and one other, what would that be? And then those two needs and one other, what would that be? And then stop the group that you're working with, the board and staff group you're working with, at 3. But harvest the number ones first, the top need from each one of the people around the room or on your web or on your internet service. You would harvest those one at a time, get those out, get those on paper, in the computer or up on easel paper, and go ahead and type those in. Let's have a few examples. If you only had enough time, money, and energy, a limited amount of time, money, and energy to work on one thing for your organization that you work with, what would it be? And then you would harvest the second set, all the number 2s, and then harvest the third set, all the number 3s. This gives you a very logical, very practical way of establishing some priorities for need that includes every one of your board members then if they participate in this, and you certainly want all of them to participate in this. And then if you had staff in the room too, you would have them participating in that too. List those up on the computer on the screen. So go ahead and share those if you would in the chat, that would be great. that top need, if you had enough time, money, and energy to address one need, what would you work on? I'll tap the brakes here a little bit so you can get a feel for that practice for doing that. I hear that keystrokes going like crazy. Prioritize the watershed program needs. What is that number one need that we need to work on? And type that in and send it to us. And we know it's going to be much different, right, for all of you. Again, if we only had enough time, money, and energy to work on one, what would it be? And you can actually do this in a blended type of format. You can actually record these and put these into notes that you would be using in the internet. And you could also display those, in person. The in-person, now that we switch back to in-person meetings and that sort of thing, or blended meetings, we'll see a lot more of that. So go ahead and type in that one thing. One of you said complete and distribute emergency action plans for our highest hazard structures. Excellent, excellent need to be taken care of. Obtaining funding for new and current staffing. And what you say there is very, very important. And you can use this exercise, this prioritization exercise, actually to identify, have everyone in the room, every board member write down, if we only had time, money, and energy to hire one more staff person, what would that be and what would they be doing? And so kind of taking that to the next level of prioritizing things. We've used that in a lot of different ways, this prioritization activity, where individuals write down the response to the first question, only enough time, and energy, and then that and one more, and that and a third priority. And then that really gets the discussion going. This makes an easy way for your board to start discussing things because it's up there on the screen and up there showing. So another example of that need would be develop farm conservation plans for all applicants while encouraging and enabling implementation to occur. This is an excellent, excellent one. And if you can kind of tell between these two exercises, the writing of accomplishment statements and then the prioritization of need, you're going to see from the example that you're going to want to hang a date on some of these needs, right? By this date or that date, we're going to complete and distribute the emergency action plans for our high hazard structures. By this date, we're going to have 2 new recruited members. By this date, we're going to obtain this much funding for new and current staffing, starting with this position, that position, and the other position that we would have, and develop farm conservation plans. Well, folks, one of the things that we're wanting to do through these very practical and easy exercises is get board member involvement, and do that. And I hope all of you that didn't type it in to all panelists and attendees are writing it on your paper there or worksheets. So again, I want to repeat that the harvesting is the important method for your prioritization. You got people around the room or on the web, right? You harvest that first need from each participant, and then you write those down. Maybe change the font color and then harvest the second set of responses. So the second one that everybody had was this, and maybe put that in a different color, blue, red, green, or whatever. And then the third set of responses. And then you can work with your board on looking at, okay, here are the needs that we've identified. Does this look right? Or is there something that we need to move in terms of the priorities? And appreciate this other example of a priority need to develop a 5-year operation and maintenance plan for XYZ watershed or dam or that sort of thing, or reservoir by January 1st, 2022. Or maybe it's an overall 5-year operation and maintenance plan for all of our watershed projects that we've got out throughout our organization. All right. Okay, switch gears a bit. I want to talk with you a bit about the power of 3. Folks, this is really interesting to watch, but if you can take a board and have them talk about the top 3 things that are important, the top 3 strategic priorities to work on in any given time, this is very important. So it might be the farm conservation plans for all applicants. It might be the operation and maintenance plan. It might be a staffing plan, for example, things like that. And then actually using that technique that we shared with you a few minutes ago, which was by this date, we're going to accomplish this. That gives you that nice measurable goal for each of these 3 strategic priorities. So if you selected 3 strategic priorities and really started working on it, right, as a watershed organization, as an agency, as a whatever, and then have a goal for each of those three. You can track and complete 3 actions for each of the strategic priorities. And rather than drafting an entire set of actions that go on 2 or 3, 4 pages like we used to do, we're finding now it's better to pick the top 3 starting activities, work those, cross them out as you get done, and that leads you to the next set of activities that you want to do under each of the goals. So 3 strategic priorities, have a goal for each, and then put 3 actions for each of those strategic priorities down and say, by this date, we're going to get this done fairly soon. Track the progress each month or each time that your board meets. Make sure that you've got this in front of them and you're talking about what it is that we were able to get done. This shows, staff responsiveness to the governing body, and it also shows your governing body or your board that you're listening to what it is that they're envisioning that we should be doing as an organization. Now you've got that governance structure working well with the staff, because the staff knows that the board wanted these things. So in the everyday operation and fulfilling grant responsibilities or fulfilling funding responsibilities and things, you're also incorporating that vision. Sometimes they're the same, right? The same things that you were going to work on are the same things the board says is important. But then which individuals within the board said that which things were important, which is also an important thing to know in your governing body. All right, so always keep 3 actions in place. So if you're going to be tracking this progress, 3 actions underneath each of these strategic priorities, you're always going to have 3 actions in play. So we got 2 of them done, and the next one we're going to do, and then the next one and the next one that we're going to do. And that keeps your strategic thinking, planning, doing, and evaluating going all the time. So setting your strategic direction by following up all the time. Folks, I get so saddened when I see these beautifully done strategic plans with they have the photos and they have the fancy graphs and the data and whatnot. There's a purpose for those, but I'll tell you that the strategic doing is usually much more messy than that, right? And it's every meeting you're talking about this stuff and working on it and making sure that we're headed in the strategic direction. And you're honoring your board members by asking them, are we doing good on that strategic direction? Are we headed in the direction you said? You said, a couple 3 months ago that this is the top 3 needs that we have, and so we're cruising on it as a staff. So are we still tracking and working? And getting that dialogue will energize your board, and I think it'll energize the staff and help that staff board relation a little bit. I always get these questions, my board doesn't talk with me. They don't say much at the board meetings. They don't do anything at the board meetings. And I'll simply ask the question of you that are on the webinar today, could it be our fault? Are we just being too good to them and giving them everything that they need to know and not expecting them to really do that? Or are we not using exercises like I just presented to you to encourage that board development and board use and board thought processes? Adult learners really like to share their experiences, and they really like to be involved in goal setting and setting the direction of the organization. Folks, that's the lifeblood of having a good, effective board, is remembering that your role as a staff oftentimes is to ask a really great question that we need to do that. Let's go over the Q&A. Dan says we got a good one. If a group only has roughly 30, 60 minutes for planning, as you mentioned earlier, what they only do as the first activity you spoke of earlier is this one too. I'm just going to tell you that that the best response to this question will be that going back to that, writing statements of accomplishment, right? Accomplishment statements, or by this date, we're going to do this. Laura, is what I would recommend if you only had 30 minutes to do that work. The second activity, I've actually put these in the order I would do them. And those of you that have been through strategic planning with me know that I put that, what are we going to accomplish by what date as an organization, right up in the very front. It's usually right after the introductions, right after the agenda and the objective, and boom, I'm right out of the hat talking with them about, they're talking with each other about what they want to accomplish. So I would do the accomplishments piece first. By this date, use that format. By this date, we're going to do this. And by all means, make sure that everybody's writing something down. Don't let anybody off the hook or just kind of go into a situation of just following the other. If everybody writes it down individually and then you harvest from each individual, right, then you get a much more bold and much more better vision, and you get a little bit of an insight to each of those board members that you're working with. And the second one would be the prioritization of needs, I think would be another one. This really needs to be talked about in terms of the bylaws of the organization you're working with, and or if it's a state agency or a conservation district, their formulative legislation that started them. So that would be probably the other exercise after those two. By what date are we going to do what? And then the second one would be the highest priority need with limited amount of time and energy. Third would be to make sure you reviewed the the formation, right? The foundation of the organization to make sure that you've got what you can do, right? In your law or in your bylaws. Some of the organizations that I've got on the webinar today, I know aren't government organizations. And so you're usually set with your bylaws and your operating procedures that way. So, okay, great question. Thanks, Dan, for catching that too. So the power of three really will help you focus energy within your board. It'll motivate people and keep members accountable, as we were talking about. But I also think it's good for staff. I mean, as a staff person, whether I'm at the executive level of the organization or I'm at a technician level or another level, I need to know what it is, the top three things that are on my hit list, right? To my check off list to do. And then my boss and I are in tune with one another about what those top three things are that we're going to get done this week, maybe this month, maybe this year. And we know that that changes as you get things accomplished. But keeping this in front of people really energizes the folks. Okay, a strategic direction tool that we've gotten from Fred Nichols. Fred was industrial in the industrial world, you know, and his boss asked him to figure out a way to clarify goals and objectives using some method. And Fred developed this goals grid, which is a really small group exercise. If you got your board and staff together, you would actually have them working on these 4 questions. And this grid, and I've got the worksheet in your notes for you, actually represents this. So what are we going to achieve as an organization? What are we trying to preserve as an organization? What are we trying to avoid through the work of our organization? And what are we trying to eliminate through the work of our organization? And these are very important questions that start to focus, an organization on do we have the right set of goals? Is our mission right? Are we really doing what we want to be doing? But this is also a 4-way methodology. You can look at an organization or a goal or even a project, right? Through these contexts. So you could look at a project and you do a goals grid for a project, a big watershed project that you want to do. What are we trying to achieve with that watershed project? What are we trying to preserve through the work of that watershed project? What are we trying to avoid through that watershed project? And what are we trying to eliminate through the work of that project? And then you harvest those again. I'm a big fan, if you haven't guessed it, have a form in front of your folks that they're working from, and then harvest those, have every individual, or maybe small groups on this one, have small groups, 2 or 3 working on what we want to achieve, another different small group working on what we want to preserve, what we want to avoid, and what we want to eliminate, and actually use those responses for that and populate the goals grid. And I usually, and you'll have these slides, by the way, we'll have you just have this goals grid up here with these prompting questions. Do we have something we want to achieve? Not yet. Do we want it? Yes, absolutely. We do want to achieve something. Do we have this that we want to avoid? No, we really don't. And no, we don't want it. So things we want to preserve, and this is kind of an interesting discussion, especially in watershed projects and things like that, the things that we want to preserve through our watershed work or our watershed organization. Uh, Things we want to preserve, a very interesting list will come out of that. You populate the goals grid using that worksheet I sent you earlier. And then is it something that we want, right? No. And do we have it? Yes. That would be something that we want to eliminate. So something that we have, right? And something we don't want things to eliminate. Folks, what I found is I use this as a most practical substitute for the old SWOT exercise, the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And when I began to understand about the SWOT exercise, we'd do a wonderful job. We would collect people's ideas for strengths and weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. We would fill flip chart papers or computer, files with the stuff, and then we wouldn't really use it much. But what I'm finding is the organizations that are using the goals grid actually are using this to test their goals, They're using it to test their projects. They're using it as an evaluation tool. Are we really achieving what we want, avoiding what we want, preserving what we want, and eliminating what we want to eliminate through the work of our organization? And they're finding that they're actually using it. You can put the results of that on cardstock, the actual results of the organization you're working with on cardstock, and use that with that board and staff regularly to test, just the basic things that we're doing. Goals grid. All right. All right. Stopping right now. Let's look, Dan, and see what other questions we may have. Now's a good time to just pop those questions in the chat, or if you want to put them in the Q&A piece, that would be fine. I'm going to tap the brakes here just a little bit to make sure that you have time to go ahead and type in a question or two for us that you can think of, or maybe the use of this or recommendation that you've got that you begin to see that you could really use. So go ahead and type those notes in about what you would use of the things that we just presented. What would you use in your organization? That idea that you thought was just pretty cool. Gotta tap the brakes, give a little bit of silence. Sure you got that. Respond to us either in the questions or in the chat box. Either one is great. I appreciate you noting the worksheets are very helpful. Did send those to everybody that registered, so you've got those, and just change that front to your organization's logo and whatnot, and use the heck out of them. I'd just be honored if you would use those. So thanks for mentioning that. Identifying the future accomplishments exercise. You're right on. I mean, it is so powerful, and we've used that with different organizations, not just natural resource organizations, but you can use that with, your softball club, a PTA, a church group, whatever. It's amazing what the people will come out with, that, and the stimulation that it gives people to actually voice what they've been thinking, but they hadn't had an avenue to say it, right? So part of our board work, right, is to give your board members avenues, exercises and things that really encourage that kind of activity. So more ideas about what you've learned that you saw. Great. Board members sharing their statement of intent for strategic direction. Yeah, and recording that, right? Putting that up on the, we used to use easel paper a lot. Now we put it up on the big screen, probably with our computers, but actually writing it down. And one of the things to remember about logging, statements of intent, is to make sure that you put it in the words that they said. Don't try to interpret what they said. Just put it in their words, write it down just the way they said it. By this date, we did that. If it's a little bit squirrely and doesn't read quite right, don't try to correct it as a facilitator. Just go with it. Write it down the way they said it. They need to see their words and know they were heard. So any guidance on how to resolve prioritization work when there are different views for organizational direction? Thanks for that question. Yeah, let me just give you that idea, and that is why we would do that. If we only had the time, money, and energy to work on one, what would it be? And we would harvest just those number ones. We'd put those in a section of the notes, and then we would harvest the number twos, would have a couple spaces after the number ones. So Monica, what we're trying to do is really trying to lessen the amount of those priorities that the board would consider. But when there's different views, you would actually take that opportunity to have those top ones. If we can only do this and only do that, and then have the board discuss that, is it this one over that one? And then have them only compare to it once, right? And then it's called a paired prioritization process, where you take the top one and compare it to the one below it, and decide whether or not which one was the higher priority and why. And it's the discussion that occurs, Monica, that is the most powerful thing. When we did the sticky dots and PowerPoint post-it notes and things like that, we really lost a lot because it didn't allow that discussion. And they'll take the second and third one then, and compare those. Is it this one over that one? And then that will lead to a prioritized list. And you may only get through that top ones that everyone had, and that's okay, right? Because many of the second and third ones are repeats of something that somebody thought was the most important. So that's how I do the resolving and prioritizing work at different views and organizational direction. And then a complete emergency. Oh, this is great. And someone just said their need is to complete emergency plan for high hazard dams on Kentucky watershed structures. And again, the thing that I would suggest on that one is hang a date on it, and by this date we're going to do that. What's interesting is when you get a lot of people in the room and they have different dates, then you have a discussion like Monica was just prompting here of, okay, so it's really 2 years from now because we need that amount of time. Some of you thought we could do it in a year. Some of you thought we had 3 years to do it, but we really don't have 3 years to do it. And you have that level of board discussion that leads to, a date and a goal that they can really rally around, right? And that's what we're trying to do is have these goal statements or these accomplishment statements, right, with a date and a pretty defined thing that we want to get done. Okay, keep those ideas coming in the chat. Keep the if you we're going to use the chat primarily, but if you throw one in the questions and answers, Dan will be monitoring that with us too and making sure that we stop to that. Again, we're going to be talking about, especially toward the end of our webinar today, what it is that you learned that you're going to be using. I want to speak of leadership a bit and effectiveness within your board. And before I launch into this, I just want to say I'm guilty of being a staff person that did too much for my board members. And what I mean by that is I went over the top and went from being the good worker, right, and good executive, making sure we had the right staffing and funding and reports to the board and things like that, to actually kind of thinking for the board and doing a little bit too much where I didn't ask them. I got ahead of my skis a little bit too far. And because I was so nice, I'll call it, I niced my board to death, which means that I did a little bit too much in the arena around visioning and whatnot that they needed to be doing with me, right? And not me for them. So ask your question as a staffer, is that occurring in your place? Is that why your board members aren't really, showing up for the meetings and participating in things like that? Because we don't really let them muscle up and give you a vision of what it is they think the organization should be doing, or what our watershed project should be doing, or what should be going on. It's common, right? It's a common illness to nice your board to death, and you want to not do that if you can help it. And we do that through these exercises that make you as a staff look great and make the board, more vocal and right in their governance position. But when you talk about building leadership and effectiveness in your watershed board or your watershed organization, I'm going to speak with you just a bit about the leadership, the 10 steps to effective leadership for all board members. And for you that are staff, I want you to incorporate these kind of in your thoughts and as you put together agendas and things like that, and work with your chair and work with your governing board. And as board members, you'll be thinking about, hey, we could do a lot more in this arena that Ray talked about today. I want to speak with you a bit about recruiting and retaining outstanding quality board members. And I want to base a lot of that on the leader's motivation. And so we'll speak to that. And then I want to give you some best practices for effective board work and policies. And then how about that building your organization's succession plan? When we start to get to the point where people want off the board or just get too busy, they're on too many boards or something like that, and you want that next board member to step up, what have we been able to do with helping the new person that's interested in our organization be even more interested and want to serve? How do we do that? And then also, you can also talk about, as an executive wants to retire or do something different, or all of a sudden they become ill and you need the next person to step up. Let's talk about that succession planning. So I'm going to talk to you about being a leader and remind us all that anyone can be a leader. And there's a leadership formula in front of you. It's kind of fun, but the vision plus the partners you have. And we're going to talk with the partners, talking about partners here in the webinar as we go along too. Times the heart equals high quality leadership. So the vision plus the people you've got around you to really do work together, plus that passion and heart, really creates the high quality leadership you want. Madison Hobbs gave us this: a leader is a person who marshals the people, the capital, the intellectual resources of the organization to move it in the right direction. And we just talked about for the last few minutes what that right direction is. So the leader would be the one to take, that all the collective capital and intellectual resources in the organization, move it forward. Now, this one I kind of want to make mention to, that intellectual resources. If you've got a board that's just sitting there because you don't have good activities for them to do during a board meeting that encourages their thought processes, use of their experience and use of their leadership, then shame on you if you're a staffer. If you're a board member that's sitting there, and this is the most boring board meeting I've ever been to, board member, you just need to step up and say, hey, this guy, came and talked with us, Board Works by Ledgerwood, and he had a couple of exercises I'd like to try with us, and that'll probably shock your staff if you're the board members asking for things like that. It's okay. They'll get over it, and they'll eventually learn that you're the boss, the governing body, and that's kind of an important thing. So, Leadership Pill by Blanchard is kind of one of those places I like to go when I start talking about leadership and work with a group in their leadership role. But leadership is not something you do to people, it's something you do with them. So, you already, I think, in the first few minutes here, realize that a lot of what I promote is having that dialogue and that work together, not just one person doing it all the work and then having everybody say, oh, how great they are. You know, all right, so here's some work from Executive Monthly, 10 Steps to Effective Leadership. Going to go fairly quickly with these, but leading isn't just managing. Managers manage things and leaders lead people. Kind of a neat graphic that I found is that you actually can have weak management to strong management, but they could be weak in leadership, right? And weak in management also. These would be some of the things that you would see in that. If you've got strong management, though, and weak leadership, then you would find these characteristics going on. If you had strong leadership, but maybe not so good management within your executive or your board, you would find these things. Frankly, folks, this is the quadrant that I want you to consider is really important. Do we have practical visionaries within our organization, that leaders, but they can also know that we need to manage some things in order to make it happen? So they got that longer term vision, they're thinking longer term, but they're really acting in the short term. Folks, what I presented to you in those first few minutes is to see those accomplishment statements, but also get down to the power of three, where you have three actions rolling all at the same time in a strategic area for a project, an activity, a committee, an organization, a board. And then it's really going to show vitality and commitment when you've got strong management and leadership. And if this happens in the same executive, make sure that you're compensating them well and keeping them with you forever, because they are outstanding. Not all of us have this quadrant in our skill set. Some of us are good at this or that or the other, and we find ourselves in different spots. But I just offer that one observation to you. Okay. So leaders have a sense of purpose, and they really, really pay attention to what it is that is going on. They are visionary. They use their imagination, their experience, knowledge, skills, and abilities, and they have a long-term focus. And they focus on achieving those goals. Henceforth, I want you to always have on the boards that you're working with or the boards you're serving on, in front of them, the goals of the organization that you're looking at regularly in the regular board meetings. And we spend so much time talking about different types of reports and data and things like that. But we also need to squeeze the time in for our strategic thinking, planning, doing, and evaluating how it's going. Leaders have courage. Sometimes their decisions aren't popular. When you actually know that someone is not good for the organization, and that you actually have to have that candid conversation with them about, it's probably time that you should do that, or you're really not a good fit for the organization, whether it be a staff or a board member. And then leaders have courage that everyone is a leader if they want to, by virtue of their position to make decisions and influence decisions. And certainly you can do that. If you've been a quiet board member, but you've been thinking that really for the organization's health and well-being, we need to do this or that, now's the time to speak up. And leaders are forceful. They do express their viewpoints. And they usually look at, that viewpoint in the context of comparing it to notes, about what they know about other organizations and effectiveness and that sort of thing. They're consistent. You can always depend on them, and their consistency in the organization always inspire trust and confidence. And it really gets to some of the values of the organization that are also reflected in the individuals. Individuals' values actually usually show up in organizations they belong to. So that's kind of an important thing to do. They're truthful, and they tell the truth even when it hurts, and they can repeat the truth because it never changes. And they have integrity, and that integrity just oozes from them. And the folks that lead with integrity, it means that a person that that other persons really want to be. They aspire to that. And trust is what happens when the values and the behaviors of an individual match up, and then people are more apt to trust and respect you as a leader and what you say and what you do, if that's the same thing. So integrity is a big thing in the leaders that you want. They concentrate on a few big themes, and we're seeing this a lot more recently. I'm seeing it in Congress and other places where it's like going to do these three things. This are the three things that we're going to be working on. These big themes are going to be the things we're going to be working on in the next few months, the next year, the next 2 years. For your organization, that's a really healthy thing to do too. Whatever that is, just making sure that you concentrate on a few big things. Uh, Leaders are willing to accept others' ideas. They're listening all the time to other people around them and saying, "Oh my gosh, you know." That the key to effective leadership is a relationship you build within a team or partnership, and within the partners, certainly between the governing board and also the executive. And then share the big picture puts everyone on the same page. So that goals, the organization, the mission of the organization, the founding documents of the organization, these are important for all of us to know, whether you're a board member or whether you're a staff person, or whether you're an executive staff person. And it's easier to get up the hill when you go up the hill together. Leaders really aren't made, and leaders are made, not born. And you're just not born with those skills. You practice those skills and you develop those skills from your youth all the way into adulthood. And we're packing experiences and knowledge along the way. And you're taking on a leadership role and you're really practicing. And then I love this quote by Ken Blanchard again: people will think for themselves when you quit doing it for them. And this, I hope, reinforces the point I was making a few minutes ago, where I served as a staff person, an executive, on a couple of boards that I niced to death. And that's what I did for them. I started thinking for them instead of letting them think for the organization. And let me tell you, folks, as good as I might think I am, I was much better when the board was doing some visioning and work. They would turn to me and ask, what I thought too. That was in the proper role and the proper sequence, right? The board had this idea. As an executive, I had that idea, and then we worked on that together, and usually we came up with something really great because we do more together than we do separately. Okay. Leaders, speaking of that, leaders are surrounded by the achievers, and they're energized by really high quality people. So they're recruiting other board members to serve on their board. They're recruiting great staff to serve, with them and do the work of the organization. And it really is. Leadership's the process of getting everyone in place they are supposed to go. Isn't that? And the most important thing that we can do as a leader is win the respect and trust of your team. I'm going to post this up here, and then I'm going to go to, we did have, I think, a question or two that came in I want to grab here. And the leader for today and the future will be the focus on how to be and how to develop quality, character, mindset, values, principles, and courage. Okay. All right. I think we had, Dan, didn't we have a question come in? Oh, I see what it is. Thomas, your hand is up, and I'm going to punch it up here and see if you can speak to us. Thomas, you had a question you wanted to offer? Okay, hit the brakes here a little bit more. If you did, you can go ahead and chat it or put it in the chat. If you wanted to raise your hand, I saw your hand go up. So if you wanted to talk with us, that would be good too. Okay, your turn. In the chat box, I want you to note something that you really felt was important about that last piece. Talking about that leadership and effectiveness within your board. But before you do that, that's okay, Thomas, thanks. Let me talk with you about recruiting and retaining your board members. And this is really, really important, because I think there's one question you put in your pocket, whether you're recruiting as a board member to your board or whether you're recruiting as a staff member to your board. Isn't that question phenomenal? Look at that. What do you want to accomplish as a leader in our organization? If it's a watershed organization, if it's an agency, if it's a whatever, what do you want to accomplish? Now, some of my friends, even that we work with in the NRCS and the state conservation agencies and whatnot, they said, well, geez, we know what they want to accomplish. Well, do you? Maybe not. And maybe that leader that's been with you for a while wants to accomplish something different than they did when they first started. Or what's even more important as staff members, right, is to know each one of our board members' response to that question, because then we can help them be successful at being a great board member. We can actually make that happen with them as a staff person, providing them the information and opportunities as a board member to do what they wanted to accomplish. Now, you need to come at this from a standpoint that be not judgmental about what they want to accomplish. Just find out what it is, right? And then the recruitment, active involvement, the retention, and satisfaction all depend on motivation. So in the board members recruitment, have a pool of candidates that are out there that you think might be interested in doing this. And one of the ways to do that is ask other organizations, watch other organizations, ask them if you got someone that's actually wanting to be on watershed project work, that sort of thing, and wants to, be a part of our organization. The candidates that are recruited on, need to meet the needs of the organization. So if we're a little bit weak on this particular type of board member, then we would want to put, emphasis on recruiting and recruiting prospectus that would reach that board member. Election and appointment are different from each of these things. Whether you're a watershed council, whether you're a watershed board, whether you're a agency, or whether you're a conservation district, or several other examples here that we've got on the phone today or on the webinar today, each of your elections and appointments. But the recruitment process that leads up to them actually filling out the paperwork and running for office is similar, right? The recruitment process. The actual election and appointment may differ from place to place, state to state. You know what? Associate board members, where you actually invite folks, technical experts and whatnot, to participate in your board meetings and be a part of your organization. They may not have a formal vote, because their bylaws wouldn't allow it or whatnot, or the structure of the organization, the election and appointment process hasn't been formalized, but certainly having non-voting members participating in meetings and being there for technical advice and things like that is important. So when you ask that question, here's the deal. You're going to find out that there's a lot of different motivating factors. What do you really want to accomplish as a board member of our organization? Could be political. They just want to tell the government what to do. And I know you're laughing at that, out there on their webinar. But there's some that just are really motivated by the pride. They just want to see that watershed become better. They want to see that that structure become better. They want to protect whatever. Some see it in prestige. They see that as an important thing that they do in their community, and they're purpose oriented. They just feel like that natural resource that they're going to protect and work on is so important. The profit and economics. There's the profitability and economics. People sometimes get on board so that they know the latest in what's going on, right? And so that they can be more profitable and they would get an economic gain. Some just like partnering. They just like being around different organizations and being a part of the partnership that are getting things done. The purpose of watershed work that we do would be important. Some like the business aspects. They get on a board to make sure the business is running well. The finances are running well. We're accountable. We're letting folks know what we're doing, things like that. Some like the social aspects of it. They just can't wait to go to the board meeting because of the cookies or the fudge that is brought to the doggone thing. Who knows? And then there's community service, certainly. There's folks that are motivated by accomplishment. And then there's the heritage part that we find in some of the natural resource arena, where dad was quite a conservationist and was involved in the watershed projects over years and things. And grandpa was involved before that, and they built the first this and that and the other in their county. And then now, you've got the aspects of heritage, right? Grandpa, then dad, son, and now, grandsons and whatnot starting to be involved and showing up as part of it, their heritage. Folks, the question, what do you want to accomplish as a board member, or what do you want to accomplish as a staff person, allows you insight into this motivating factor, which allows you as a staff or another board member to help that board member be successful. Now, you do this without judgment again, because sometimes you'll get people on that have a purpose or a motivation in mind, and it's good that you know it, because you may want to steer them to a different organization, that sort of thing. But you also want to know what that is, so that if possible, you can help them achieve that. All right. Now, this is, and Christian brought this up, the long-term sustainability, the knowledge and history, the structure that benefits not lost from generation to generation. And one of the things I want to mention here, Christian, is so important that we pass that on. Our tribal nations actually are best at doing this. All right, they're passing on intergenerational things to the next generation and next generation, whether it be history, purpose, the importance of Mother Earth, whatever it might be. But we can also learn from that and say that we need to, on our boards and whatnot, also pass on that the history and the structure benefits. And what that meant, over time, go out there on site, look at that watershed projects, structures, that sort of thing. Look at that and talk about the importance of it. We didn't have this then, right? 30, 40 years ago. We've got it now, and here's why it's important to the future. So you're absolutely right. Good observation. Keep those observations going. Keep that chat going for us. We really like to see that. Well, part of this building leadership and effectiveness in your board is to make sure that your board members have a good toolkit. So, hey, Dan, I'm going to send you this. I'm going to send you a document. I may have already sent it to you that you can put up on the website, and that will get at some of the board members' toolkit. But look at this list, folks. This is pretty phenomenal thing. Association Management put together a few years back, and they said the board members' toolkit first and foremost is that you always show up and that you all talk about what your leadership legacy would be. You get an early start at those board materials. And for those of us of staff, right, that have worked with boards, make that in such a manner that is and shared in a way that that board really wants to receive those board materials. Get some feedback from them. Have them write it down and give you notes, if nothing else, about how they want their materials given to them. Look back, look forward, not backward, as you're a board member. Continually review your mission, vision, and plan, and that gets at some of the things I've been talking about earlier in the webinar. Strategic thinking, and I'd say strategic thinking, planning, doing, and evaluating is important, right? Is a special responsibility for the board member, but also for the executive and for the staff. Some of the best ideas we have are our staff working with our clients, right? And we need to get that to our executive and the executive to the board and let's talk about them. Talk to the new members. Oh my gosh, be recruiting all the time, right? Make sure that we've got new members, sitting in our hip pocket that are anxiously awaiting someone to step off the board so they can get on. And that's an important thing. Bring in a new member, right? Bring in a member, sets a needed example, at least introduce them to the board. Hey, this is so-and-so from this organization. We just thought you'd like to meet them. They're coming to our board member meeting just to get familiar with us, things like that. And remember that every board meeting is like a recruitment tool. I had county commissioners tell me once that a particular organization's meetings were the worst ones they ever had, but man, they got a lot done. So we're a showcase, right? And as board members and how we're doing things right. Have your calendar with you. Understand the plan for a crisis. And I'm going to get to this a little bit in the succession planning, but man, you need a thunder book for all those most important organizations, right? It's like, dang, that executive, you need a thunder book because the person right underneath them or the person that needs to step up because they just had a heart attack, a stroke or something, right? They need to be able to run the business, right, with an understanding of what would need to happen during a crisis. But the board also, and hey, watershed structures and whatnot is right for this, right? If that dam breaks and that structure goes to pieces and whatnot, what is our plan for what we do? And I think in watershed organizations in particular, you want to do this. Figure out a good filing system. Board work doesn't take a holiday. And actually, when you talk about it and think about it, sometimes it's when the person is switched off, not at a board meeting, not reading your stuff, and they're just working their fields or working cattle or doing something else, they really are thinking about, your organization. You want them to be thinking about your organization. Disagree at the board meeting. If board meetings, whether it's staff or whether it's a board member, but present a united front when you come out of that. Our decision was this, and that's an important thing. Ask for staff research help early. Nothing worse, right, than to ask a staff person, 24 hours before the meeting to come up with data set or this and that and the other, that sort of thing that is just going to take so much time to get. So ask for that staff research to be early, preferably the board meeting before you need it at the next board meeting. Rapid turnover of executives is expensive and time consuming. Deal with a name game now. So people that don't understand the acronym for this and that, and they didn't understand what this meant or that meant, hey, just make sure it's okay to do that. Use less acronyms until all the people get used to it. Tune into the leading indicators. How are our natural resources doing? How's the water doing? Where are we at on this and that and the other that are important to your organization? Grow room for your members. Agree on what constitutes success. Hey, by this date, we're going to do this. By that date, we're going to do that. Our mission is this. We're going to be doing this and that. Our next hire is going to be this. Our next need is going to be that. Agree on what constitutes success. Achievement really flows from the team at the top of the organization and just permeates all the way through. Resist the temptation to micromanage. This is a note for your board member, right? Not to micromanage. I'm asked often, well, how much is that? The executive should do this and the board should do that. Let me just tell you, folks, that is a discussion that happens between the executive and the board, and it's part of the roles and responsibilities that identify and position descriptions so that you know who does what. And a staff person working for an executive that works for the board, where does that all fit together? Where is that position description and whatnot? So make sure that micromanaging doesn't need to occur, from the board members to the rest of the organization. The bottom line, money matters. It really does matter, whether we want to admit it or not. Revenue and expenses are important, and keeping track of those and making sure it's headed in the right direction. Be mindful of other people's times as well as your own, and be a great volunteer, and then affect a wonderful transition from you to someone else. But there are three things every board member needs all the time, anywhere, and just as much of that as you can get. And that would be that they need to know their role and responsibilities. Folks, I worked with a lot of organizations, and I asked them to present to me before I start their meeting, facilitation, show me their duties and authorities, roles, responsibilities, bylaws, and legislative authorities, whatever foundational documents we have. But a board member needs to know what their role and responsibilities are so that they can perform those in the best way possible. Then they need to be kept informed. And this information is a good flow from the executive and staff over to a board, but needs to be done in a way that the board really appreciates. We want our reports to be this long or this whatever, or we'd rather have a video, or we'd rather see a YouTube of the accomplishments, whatever it might be. Just get in tune with what the board wants for information, and then have a meaningful contribution. So any board member needs to know their role and responsibilities, to be kept informed, and they need to have a meaningful contribution, or they're going to stop coming to meetings. They're going to stop participating. They're just going to be quiet at meetings. They might show up, but they might not do anything. And that's usually this Achilles heel, or an illness in a board, is usually they don't feel they're having a meaningful contribution to what it is that the organization should be doing. Got to guard against that if you can. If you're a fellow board member, find out what it is they want to accomplish, and hopefully you can help them do that. If you have the answer to that from each of the board members, you can help them have a meaningful contribution. Wow, that's quite a bit. So building board effectiveness. I'm going to talk about this fairly quickly, but mission and goals are important. We already mentioned that, and making sure that that is well understood. The organization and structure, I've spoken about this a couple times, but you really need to look at the organization you've got, whether it's government or non-government, whether it's a 501c3 or something else, and making sure that your operating rules, procedures, and your legal requirements are all in order, right? That if you've got committees and task forces, people know about them. You've got outstanding accounting. I mean, you are presenting good financial statements that you can look at the bank statements and say, oh yeah, that's exactly where we're at. But you're also forecasting the budget and looking at it for the year, and you're doing that crisis management thing too. Your meetings are phenomenal, right? As part of that organization, you've got development and training. Jennifer asked me, in fact, it's a question that I'm going to go back to right now, Jennifer, because I want to make sure that we grab this. And that is, you asked me about when we should be talking about the development of an administrative position, right? Administrative position itself. And it goes like this. What kind of continuing education should an administrative assistant expect to receive each year? Either learning hours or topics of learning, agriculture, dealing with administrative skills. And my answer to that, Jennifer, is that every organization should have a training and development plan for their staff and their board members. Each staff position should have a development plan, a training needs plan, and a training format that they're following through. And so it may take a few years to get all of the things that we think that position should know, but we should also be able to help them with that. And the board members should be going through trainings, from the orientation to the, getting familiar with the organization they serve, to governance skills, to budgeting skills and things like that. And we're pretty weak, really, in the organizations that I've worked with, in having those board member training needs identified and put into a plan. And so we should be doing ongoing training and ongoing activities and that sort of thing too. Let's also come back into the question, do you have any suggestions for boards that have to operate under open meetings laws or encourage honest, open discussion, disagreement? Well, this is a great question, Jane, and that, every those organizations, those boards that are government boards, usually have an open meetings law that dictates how they would do that in the state. Now, the interesting thing is that there's 50, right? There's like 50 some odd different versions of that open meetings law across the nation. So you've got to study, are we an organization that's bound by that? If the answer is yes, get a hold of the agency that can help you understand the open meetings laws for your particular state and have them give you some advice on that. And it varies on what you can actually talk about, in an honest, open discussion disagreement. But the bottom line is the open meeting laws across the nation encourage government entities to do things in the open. So there's just a few things that you could actually go into a private discussion about or an executive session about. And there's a methodology that you have to go through in order to go into that executive session. All that has to be taken into account. Now, if you're a nonprofit, non-governmental entity, then the rules might change for you regarding when you go into your executive session and how you do that. But if you use the government version, you probably can't go wrong if you're a private organization in terms of what you would go into executive session about, how you would record or not record what was discussed, and how you would come out of the executive session to make a decision. Be very careful. Find out what your laws are in your state and follow those. It would be my best advice. Now, open discussion and disagreement. You know, have a facilitator, have them talk with the board about, we need to talk about issue A tonight, and I'd like you to write down what it would look like when it's working well, right? And that would be a suggestion that you could have in an open meeting, right? Everyone would write down some notes about what this particular issue or concern would look like if it was working well, right? And it could be, one of several different examples of what that might be. But that's a question to put in your hip pocket, right? Next question that came in. Well, I'm going to go to can the executive director be a facilitator or should it be an outside person? You know, Monica, I'm going to suggest that you go with an outside person that's trusted, right? Rather than you, because sometimes the executive director is the one that needs to be involved in that heavy, crucial, critical discussion, right? So you want to be, as an executive director, if you're the executive director, you're going to want to be involved. So you have the facilitator that you trust that's going to, maintain order and let the discussion happen and concentrate on what needs to be done, right? Uh, rather than you doing it. So I would encourage an outside facilitator if at all possible. If it can't be possible, you're putting yourself in a really tough spot as an executive director, especially if it goes wonky on you. That's why if you have an outside facilitator, it might go a little bit better. Guidelines on an orientation should look like. Yeah, there's a few different, but the bottom line is that those foundational documents, right? Whether it's a government law or whether it's bylaws or the formation of the organization, that needs to be first and foremost in the orientation. But you know what, Don? Here's the deal: is that I usually start with that. What do you want to accomplish as a board member of the organization as part of the first part of the orientation? So I'd start with that. Then I would go to, here's the organization that you're going to belong to, and here's some of the things we had. Then go to your mission, vision, goals, and that sort of thing, your strategic plan and direction. Go over that with them, and then go over the major programs, and then go over the major budget items, right? And then talk with them a little bit about how they're going to receive information as a new board member. Those are first things off the top of my head in orientation. If you want to go a little bit deeper into that, we certainly can after the session. Then I can share with you a couple, topic type orientation guidelines that we've had over the years for some of the organizations I work with. Well, folks, meetings are the lifeblood of an organization. I hope you'd all just hoorah and say, "Yeah, that's exactly right, Ray." But really defining a schedule and agenda, and folks, what I got to tell you is a lot of our agendas are really bad. I mean, they're really really bad because we do have an approval for the minutes, we got approval for the budget, we got approval for this and that, and here's Joe to talk with us for the next 90 minutes about this program and that program. Okay, when did we get the opportunity for the board members to talk about their vision, their dreams, their thoughts, their work, that they want to see done, that sort of thing? That you really need to balance that and put that into agenda, my heart will just sing. And I know Dan's will too, is if you take some of these notes that you got from today and you put them into actual exercises that you did with your board, and that really helped, get them energized and enthusiastic about what we want. So our meetings, our agendas, our reports, our background documents, while they need to be talked about, could be distributed in a timely manner and may not have to have large amounts of discussion at the meeting if everyone's reading their notes. And we saw that right in the board member toolkit is, by gosh, reading the notes is probably an important thing about being a board member. But your location, physical arrangements are important for good board work too. Kind of look around you. Just because you've had that meeting in that same spot all the time doesn't mean that you have to have that board meeting in that same spot all the time. And we certainly learned during the pandemic that we can do board meetings in a lot of different ways. Just mentioned that facilitation and useful tools and equipment is sometimes a good way to kind of spice up the meetings a little bit. But get some feedback and some notes from your board members. And here's the question I would ask. The question I'd ask is, the single most important thing we could do to improve our board meetings would be, write it down, share it. Some staffer is at least writing it on the easel paper or on the computer and logging it. And you're talking about what things you could do. And as a staffer, be open to what those board members want. After all, they are the governing body, and you want them to be happy and satisfied. And they may be attending other meetings and whatnot that are just so cool, right? And they want to bring those ideas back to your organization. Internal communication. Have a way that the members identify your specific information in a desired format that they want and the deadlines that they're looking for, and that sort of thing, especially on big grants and things like that. Are we delivering what we should be delivering, how we should be delivering it, how? Should be able to provide timely and accurate and useful information, for all of our members. And there may be in a variety of approaches that you want, and it might be the board members that come up with that best approach. Just because we've done it this way all the time doesn't mean that we have to do that again forever. Identify that preferred communication media: email, text, voice, regular mail, how they want their reports, that sort of thing. Now, external communication, man, this gets really important. Because the bottom line is that you want to identify target audiences that you want to reach and maintain communications with, and you want to identify what kind of change in behavior you want from them, and you want to identify what kind of media they listen to. So this one down here, the communications planning, the message, action desired, the media, and then evaluating how that goes. But I think this policy on who speaks for the board, when they speak for the board and whatnot, you just had a failure of a project that you had, and somebody's got to speak for the board. You are in agreement between the board and the executive who's going to be speaking for the board, and for the most part you would know what it is you're going to say because you've done some crisis management to think about that stuff. Now, some of this really should be formalized in policy development and planning, so that the board's policy setting and planning procedures are well in place, and that they have a policy on this and that. Here's who communicates for the board. Here's who gets travel for the board. Here's how big jobs are approved. Here's how we take care of our liability. All these are pieces of policy that need to be taken care of. But you would actively be monitoring those plans and policies for development and reviewing, adhering to the reflected policies. You asked the question about orientation. I got to think that your policies, special personnel policies and things like that, would be important. If you got board member policies, all of those would be reviewed with your new person. And maybe make it a couple sit downs instead of just one big old long one, so that they can absorb and bring questions back to whoever's doing the orientation. This accountability and evaluation is important. The board's going to review and evaluate their organization overall, and that there should be evaluation criteria for the staff executive. Worked with one organization and hadn't reviewed their staff, their executive, in 8 years. And I think that's just horrid. It's horrid for the board, but it's horrid for that executive director too, not to know where they sit with their board and how they feel like that they're doing. So prevent that. Annual evaluation is important. Evaluation criteria, people would know what they're evaluated on. And then an evaluation of the programs. Is that really achieving what our organization wants? Is that watershed project? Is that work doing what we want to do? And then, bring questions and use the feedback that we get. Okay. This long range plan development, while we could spend a lot of time on it, I'm just going to put this slide up and take it down fairly quickly, but you do need as a board to identify these things and the goal, structure, teaming, operations, issues, problems, and outcomes. And a plan should be developed. So when you analyze the needs of your organization, you're going to inventory those programs, what we're working on, what we're not working on. Sure, you could identify the strengths, weaknesses, goals of the district, but I also think that you'd use the goals grid to evaluate how we're doing towards the needs. And you would identify the current talents of the board that you want. Well, there's succession planning, and I think this is, you're really in an area that I would love to come back maybe and talk a little bit more with you at some other point in time. But the board member needs of your organization, you're looking at the current talents of your board members, and you're saying, wow, if so and so dropped off, we really do need someone with that kind of talent. If so and so dropped off, we need that, and recruiting for those needed talents always. And then the people that we serve, that we actually did the work with, a watershed project, a conservation project of some kind, things like that, actually become the best potential board members because they know the value of your organization through the work that you did and the services you provided. They become a talent pool that you should have, regularly talking with your board and attending meetings and whatnot, and talking about their project and how it went and things like that. Most important to do that. And they probably would have other circles of influence that you want to find potential board members. But you know what? It might be a board member, or it might be a staffer that just came out of college that is a board member, is somebody, right? And they need to be able to do that, and be able to see that there's opportunity in the staff, or there's opportunity in the board to be able to be a part of our organization. When it comes to the employee needs of the organization, the current talents of your executive, uh, and your employees, just honor them, value them. If you need to make a change because something's just not working like it should, not a good fit, sometimes that happens. But also have a succession plan for those key positions that you need to make sure that are covered. Some of our jobs, in particular, where liability is high and engineering is so important, and keeping track of different permits and whatnot is so important. My gosh, there needs to be I'll call it a thunder book. You can describe it however you want, but for key positions that have critical information, if that individual is no longer available to work in your organization, again, life intervenes. Sometimes we have that heart attack, we have that stroke, we have somebody else that needs extended care, somebody we just don't know, right? But you need to be able to hand the next person up, right? And you need to talk about, as an organization, who is that next person up in the staff that would take on the executive's role or the engineer's role or something else, that you need to be able to get out. Hire the talented people, find a place for them. Sometimes it's just a matter of, that that's a talented person in the watershed area or conservation area, and you just want them. So you've got them kind of in your mind a lot when you're talking about things. Well, a competing two-letter word in board development, if it is to be, it is up to me, or if it is to be, it is up to us. And I'd offer to you that the most important two-letter words for board development, if if it is to be, it is up to me, because you're the only one that can decide if there's going to be an us and a board working together. Okay, let's talk about that board staff connection and partners a little bit with our remaining time. One of the pieces that I can offer to you is, this is an important leadership partnership, the board and the executive. They need to be, talking a lot together, thinking about things, forecasting issues or needs, talking about priorities, and the constructive interactions that they have are very important. And it should be a regular review of the board, the executive relationship, and making sure that, their expectations of the executive are this or that, but not this or this, right? And that you're having that conversation. For the hundreds of organizations I work with, that's different, right? But that discussion was important to have so that they could define those roles. And a board member that could be a person that a staff person could contact if there were issues, especially if it was related to the executive director, is an important piece to say have in your organization too. All right, you're going to build a strong staff board connection. You're going to have good position descriptions for every position, and you're going to have an organizational chart that starts with the board and ends with the other staffer right at the very last of the organizational chart. But everybody knows, here's who I report to, here's who they report to, here's how this goes on, and everyone's encouraged to use that structure in order to bring issues and needs and things and thoughts forward to the board, or the board to the staff, right? And honoring that is sometimes a policy position, right? That the board's going to work with the executive is going to work with the rest of the staff, et cetera, et cetera. But the board member roles would be clearly defined. Two that I can think of that would be most important is one, envision a program to meet the watershed and people needs, and then hold everyone accountable. Those would be the two major roles for a board member. And then the responsibilities would be clearly defined if we're working with staff, right? Program, education, supervision, administration. And like the one individual asked, when should we be worried about, having the right kind of development plan or training plan for any one of our staff positions? Right from the start, the position description, the organizational chart, training plans, so incredibly important to an organization that runs smoothly, and that you're checking them every once in a while and you're making sure that the opportunity for that next training that that individual needed on their list of trainings that they're going to be having from year one to year whenever, right, is happening. And especially for our engineers and our technical positions, right, that we need to keep up on our permits, we need to be able to keep up on our engineering tools and techniques and whatnot. Oh my gosh, we need all of that. So having those training plans are important along with your position description. Well, the working relations between the board members and staff are so important to talk about. And the preparation for meetings, completing assignments, the ethics that we would have in all parts of our organization, and the responsibilities are clear. I'm going to offer this observation to you. Habits create culture, which means that if you get bad habits that start into an organization, from the simplest thing like, showing up late for meetings, or having meetings run overtime, or so and so is going out and speaking with the media when they really aren't representing the organization. Those kind of habits create a culture, and you want have good habits to create good culture, not bad habits creating bad culture. And that usually means that we have to have strong evaluations that go on at least an annual basis, if not more than that. And then if need be, that there are performance plans, right, that are developed for people that need to increase their performance in a certain area or correct some things that need to be corrected. I like that question at the end, which is my favorite, about when there's an issue, especially around staffing or board connection, whatnot. What would it look like when it's working like it should? What would it look like when it's working well? And I think that's a question to put in your hip pocket and use often when it comes to issues resolution. Okay, going to talk about partners, being one and knowing one here as it relates to our watershed work and things like that. But be ready to write down the 2 or 3 things that you really got from our webinar that we had that you can really take home and use with your organization. So let's talk about partnering. And let's talk about the 10 commandments of human relations. All 6 of them are listed there. I always get a kick out of that. Speak to people, smile at people, call people by name, usually their correct name. You want to make sure that that's important. That's important to all of us. Be friendly and helpful. And a service-oriented leader is so important. Be cordial and be genuinely interested in people and what they've got going on and how they've got it. Human relations, be generous with praise, cautious with the criticism, but sometimes the criticism is needed in order to become better. We know that from tension in an organization sometimes tells us what we need to improve. Well, be considerate with the feelings of others. I mean, you may have a big frog to swallow and you needed to talk with someone about a critical need that we have, but you also know that they have feelings. How do they see this? What do they see when it's working well, like it should? Things like that. Are there things that we can do to assist you, information wise, or things like that, training wise? And then be thoughtful of the opinions of others. May not agree with them, but you can be thoughtful and appreciate that they did have an opinion. Leaders have strong opinions. And then be alert to give service. This one is paramount in what we want to do. Here's a really fun formula again: relationships before issues and tasks. And so it's like a bank account. You can consider it, your bank account with partners and alliances and relationships. And these accounts run back and forth, and you just don't want to be overdrawn, right? And the rules and regulations affect these things. Deposits and withdrawals, you're doing something that really helped the environment and helped an individual. And then sometimes you got to tell them, well, we really can't do that, or we need to do that. But it's important never to overdraw your account within your partnerships. Knowing when we got a good partnerships, you would build a partnership to reach a specific goal or goals. You want to get this done or that done. But oftentimes we build partnerships to combine or pool resources. And those resources are expertise and knowledge and skills and staffing and money, and a lot of different things can fall into that. And then to create credibility. Sometimes, just the partners and the amount of partners that you've got, in a project and activity are so important because you've just built the credibility on what it is that you're going to be doing. And the question that you would ask is, do we have the right players in the room? Do we have the right players in this project to actually do what we need to do? And so for each watershed issue, there's really a unique set of organizations and individuals that you need to reach. And some of those might be listed here on the screen here. And I just put a few of them down thinking that, oh my gosh, the property owners for sure, right? And the agricultural organizations, environmental groups, fish and wildlife groups, flood control groups, community leaders, industry and corporate leaders, city government officials, county government officials, state and federal agency and elected officials. And there should be another bullet that says other, right? A big old other of organization you need, unique to your project, unique to your organization, unique to whatever. And this list of who we need to reach for our partnerships, is important. Now, you're squirming a bit in your seat because you're saying, oh my gosh, I don't want to invite that organization or this organization. Folks, I got to tell you, that's the time you probably identified a key organization that you do need to invite, because so many of the times in natural resources we find that the goals of an organization that we want to hate, right, sometimes align with a certain project or certain things that have, and their sphere of influence, power cluster, you might say, the power cluster that they relate to is different than the power cluster that you might relate to, or the agricultural organization or that organization or this organization. But think of a power cluster, and as you expand the partnership, how important it is to realize that you might just be expanding into a whole nother world of support, and support in a lot of different ways. 7 elements of an effective partnership. This is when you know that you got it, and you being one would mean that you pay attention to these 7 elements of an effective partnership. First, goals of the organization. Goals of the partnership are very well thought out. The outcomes and payoffs, what benefits can be achieved by working together. They would get this, we would get that. The partnership gains from this and that. And the leadership must be able to move toward those agreed upon goals in a timely manner. And this work was done by Oregon State University, and the commitment is an important element of the effective partnerships. Each person must be committed to accomplishing the goals, coming to the meetings, seeing through the projects, doing the things that need to be done. And communication is very important. Finding an effective communication means between the partners and doing that. And then working on turf, right? Sensitive to turf concerns, and making sure that turf is paid attention to. Are we getting into that role of that agency or that organization? Well, maybe with purpose we are, or maybe we need to back off a little bit and do something and let them take the lead on something, right? Diversity, gender, ethnic representation. It turns out that NASCA, National Association of State Conservation Agencies, is going to be sponsoring a diversity, inclusiveness, and equity webinar on July 20th. So if for more information, you can look at their website and find that too. But we need to involve people from diverse backgrounds in the work that we do. Well, you're going to attract that partner with the WIFM. And some of you have heard of this before. What's in it for me? In this case, what's in it for the partner? And so you need to switch your thinking in terms of making a good partnership and keeping a good partnership by thinking about it from their perspective. How would this particular project, activity, program, or whatever help them do something that they couldn't have done on their own? And then is there a common cause, right, that we can see together? Look at their strategic plans, their websites, their things like that. Find those commonality things for that project or activity you want to do, and then the shared vision. We see that it looks like this when it's really like it should be. And that diverse partnership, avoid working with just the same old group. Just because we've always gotten them together and they're easy to work with and we know each other, means that probably we need to look a little bit farther and see if we can reach out to new groups and involve them. And the questions that you would discuss, in terms of keeping a good partnership. Who are you currently having success with it in a partnership, and what made that success? The greatest challenges you faced, and what you're trying to accomplish. Was those goals well set? What we want to accomplish by this date, we want to do this. Why is this significant to what we're trying to accomplish, and what are the potential partners that we should be looking for? How do you find new partners? You're just going to look at who would have a stake in this, who would really want to do something with this, who beyond the decision makers, first the decision makers, but who else, the organizations and agencies that we would involve in our watershed project, our watershed activity. Here's your formula for building successful partnerships. We've given you a few formulas to consider today. One of them is successful partnerships usually mean that knowing your partners is an important part of this and knowing what it is they want to accomplish. Second would be building a good communication system that you're able to use and communicate together. Third would be building that cooperation, that you have by this good communication and knowing what you want to accomplish, communicating it well with one another, solving issues, working together on things, sharing resources. A lot of this means that you're sharing good resources and then finally you're building trust along the way. So that would be your formula starting here. A successful partnership is knowing your partners, communicating well together, cooperating, and building trust. So if you picked a watershed issue, for example, and you could build a partnership with an organization or individual, who would you involve? And then if you could build a partnership with just one individual organization, and you'll recognize this question from earlier in the webinar, right? And then you could build a partnership with that one organization or individual and one other, and that one and one other, and that one and one other. And finally, you'll have your list of the partners that you want to build, the partnership that you want to build with the organizations that you want to partner with. Wow. Well, we've reached a lot of information here. Now I'm ready for your questions and anything that you want to do. You can do one of two things. You can enter your question in a chat box and we can queue it up, or you can raise a hand and we can take a few that way. So Dan, did you have a question or two that you wanted to pose to the group and get us started here? And I'll watch the chat in the questions box here for more questions.
No, Ray, I did want to say, I recognize for some of the folks on the webinar today that this is kind of like an oil change on your car. And for others, it's kind of like a major overhaul of the engine. But all of these things work toward a more effective board and in a more effective program. So whether you're in the business of upstream flood control, irrigation, land treatment, whatever is your focus or your thrust, the things that we've talked about today are the underpinning of getting that job done and doing it well and doing it with quality. So I hope folks will take some things away from this that make life better up and down the scale, both as board members and as employees, and that in turn shows up as an improvement in the type of work that we're doing out there on the ground.
Yeah, we'd love to hear from Dan, and I both would love to hear what you picked up from today that you really are going to use, whether with your board or with your staff, with a committee, with a watershed group, an irrigation group, whatever it might be. And so while we're soliciting some questions, I also want to tell you there's 60 folks on the line, and I'm expecting 60 responses to the question, what did you pick up from today that you're really going to use? What did you pick up from these few minutes together that you're really going to use at your place? And go ahead and type that in the chat box. And we'll just kind of see some of those as you come in and talk a bit about those. But if you do have a specific question, that would be important too. You know what Dan spoke about was so important to us. And we find out that I think some of the work, Dan, that I've done with landowners, for example, that wanted to work on a project, is to put them in a room and ask them, what does this watershed look like, this project look like, this county look like, this area look like when it should be like it should be. Boy, they're surprising, right? The responses you get after they write down a few notes and they get that are phenomenal. It's like, oh my gosh, the light bulb went on, and they could speak to a landowner could speak about that creek being better, or that, that reservoir being in there, or that irrigation water was going to go here and there, right? And they could speak to that. It's so much fun to listen to. You're going to get a big kick out of this when you start using these techniques, primarily because it just uncorks the ability of the people to speak, whether it's your board members or a stakeholder meeting or a landowners meeting, something like that. I think it's just fun. So I'm looking for 60 responses here, Dan, and they're starting to flow in. Let's kind of refer to a few of them. One person said, that that really the board toolkit was going to be helpful to them, and the accomplishment statements, good for you. Having a mini training in each board member, absolutely, and just a exercise that they could look forward to. And thanks for saying that you'll implement that. Great seminar. Willing to share it with the board members once it's posted to the website, and use these slides. Right, Dan? We designed these, you and I, for everybody to use. So pick up the ones that you can use, the ones that you want to use in a board meeting or something for an exercise, a couple, 3 slides, and plan on asking my board to write down the first project they would work on if they had funding and time. And make that a limited amount of time and money, because if you go unlimited, you'll get all kinds of responses that aren't reasonable. So the practical side of this is what would we do? What's the need if we only had a limited amount of time, money, and energy? Good. The 3 things all board members need. Isn't that golden? I mean, to know their role, that seems so obvious, right? To have good information to achieve that goal. But the meaningful contribution, oh my gosh, that's what kills a board if you don't have enough meaningful contribution for them to enjoy. And all that comes from their heart. We think we know, but they actually know. I had a board member tell me one time he stopped coming to meetings, and when I said, well, they're not doing what I should be doing. And we kept giving him all the information related to his big farming operation, right? Big irrigator, tens of thousands of acres. We kept giving him all the water quantity information that you could absorb, right? And I finally had a candid conversation when I said, Keith, what do you want? He said, I just want to see trees planted in my county. I gave him the reaction like, you got to be kidding me. Trees. I mean, you're an irrigated farmer. He said, yeah, but I just want to see trees planted in my county. We started to turn things around, build a program around tree planting for their organization. And next thing we know, Keith is taking leadership roles and doing great things. So don't give up on a board member that is either quiet or stopped working. That's when you need to go as an executive or a staff member and find out what they really want to accomplish. So 3 things board members need: the R before INT and the Thunder Book. Some of you, one of you said you're going to use that. Keep the board interacting and involved. It's going to go so much easier on you when you do that. Just keep them involved, keep them energized, give them a little something to think about and talk about, and then make it in their wheelhouse, right? Of finding a vision and holding people accountable and solving issues. These are board member things that should be done. As an executive, you shouldn't have to rely on yourself to be, everything to everybody when you got a good board there, and your board will become better if you do that. Statements of intent, prioritizing power. 3, one of you mentioned, going to get boards more engaged and quit nicing them down. I'm so glad somebody heard what I said, because that term I've used in a lot of my trainings before. You niced them to death, and I'm guilty. I was guilty of doing that until I realized it goes a lot better when you let them really muscle up. They gotta go work out too, which means their governing role needs to be worked on. Okay, and easy to get into routine to fall into. Absolutely. We know that, and we need to break that routine with just the simplest of, hey, let's write down accomplishment statements tonight. Everybody writes down 3. By what date are we going to do this? Give them a time frame of 5 years or something to get it done anytime within the next 5 years. Have them write their statements, have them share them and talk about them. That's a very important part of this process, because some people learn by writing, some people learn by hearing, some people uh, by doing, some people learn by sight. And so you want to appeal to all those. My educators and the teachers in the room would say, you got to appeal to all of those different ways that people learn. So that's why the exercises that Dan and I are showing you today, really get at all of those ways. Really great. Your thank you is appreciated, and I plan to use these exercises for management board to foster important discussions. All good reminders of how to handle a meeting and yourself. Very good. Board toolkit, first thing. We're going to send that, Dan, to you as a PDF file that has the board toolkit on one side, and then I think the 10 steps to effective leadership on the other. So it'll be a nice colored, a document that'll match the PowerPoints and whatnot. And hey, folks, you want to use those leadership things and the board toolkit slides? I'm just encouraging Dan to get those up there on the National Watershed Coalition website. Board toolkit. Thanks. Strong leader qualities, 10 commandments of human relations, 3 things all board members need. Meetings make me sad because too much one-way communication. I know, if we can get people to read the reports or tell us, Tom, how they want those reports put together, right? And that's going to help you, I think, be able to have them read the reports in advance. And remember, habits create culture. So if the habit is every board member reads their stuff, right, and comes prepared to discuss important things about a report or something, that's golden. That's when we've reached that point where we, the habit became culture. A good habit became culture. And the board dialogue on solving problems, not listening to reports. Yeah. And it maybe you just queue up one issue. And remember, Tom and others, I think the important thing there is you got this big issue. What does it look like? Write down a few notes about what it looks like when it's working like it should, right? And that one question will oftentimes cue the discussion that you would have. Accomplishment statements was noted again, and having the goals in front of the boards each month. My goodness, yes. If you want your board to be active, the three strategic areas and the three goals in front of them, and are we tracking our actions, and as a staff, are we queuing in to the actions to the strategic areas, really keep the livelihood of the organization going. uh, so I think having it in front of them each month, and at least having 10 minutes or so to talk about our strategic direction and how's it going. 10 steps to effective leadership, board staff connections. Thanks for that. The presentation will be recorded and available for review. Certainly will be. And Dan, this might be, segments of this might be kind of fun for the group to grab and have at their meeting, right? That they would actually use it at their meeting. Board toolkit, and yes, it will, Dan says. And Pamela says, thank you so much. Keep those coming in while we're giving these last few comments. The thing that you got from today that you just are going to use. I mean, it's just something you just know you're going to use. With that, then, I'll keep looking here as we go along, but let's move to Dan. And Dan has some concluding comments, and appreciate you putting those tips and techniques you learned today that you're going to be using. This helps reinforce what we hope to get done with our webinar today. So for our closing comments, keep those coming in. Again, we had 60 folks and so I'm expecting 60 of those things that you're going to be using when you adjourn today. Dan?
Well, we know that your time is valuable. It's very valuable to us. At the Watershed Coalition, we like to say that the collective intellectual power of our membership is the power of our organization. And there's certainly some things that we talked about today, and Ray educated us on, that will help the Watershed Coalition board. And I hope that you've picked up some things that will make your board better, make your job better, and make your execution on the landscape better as well. Don't forget our website. I'm easily available by email or phone. And we are driving teenagers and young people off of Facebook by the millions. So find us on Facebook and keep in touch. We utilize Facebook to also share information and provide information about upcoming activities. Again, we sure appreciate your time. Ray, thank you so much for the excellent presentation today. For those of you who might be interested, we have gotten our courage up. We're going to have an in-person meeting October 3 through 7 in Spokane, Washington. We're meeting in conjunction with the National Association of State Conservation Agencies. So mark your calendar. Hope to see you there. In the interim, if there is any way that the National Watershed Coalition can be of service to you, please feel free to contact us. And I know Ray will tell you the same thing. If you just reach out to him with any questions or afterthoughts, we'll be glad to address those. So thank you so much for spending the afternoon with us.
Thank you, Dan. And this is what the Palouse looks like around Spokane this time of the year when we've got water. But pray for rain in all the right places across our nation. Dan, thanks so much to the National Watershed Coalition for sponsoring the webinar today. So that'll be our webinar today. I see it's 1 o'clock, and we're going to stop right on time today. And it's 3 o'clock Central and 4 o'clock Eastern. Have a great time. Let Dan and I know what you use of what we've given you today.